Hey guys, how are you? This is Ishai Breslauer, your host of the CRE SharkEye Show. Hope you guys are doing great today. And I'll tell you something. We have a very special guest today. We have a lot of special guests, but to me, it's a very special guest. And I'll tell you why. Because every sensei, every CEO, every acquisition manager, director, call it whatever you want, needs to have his own sensei. And one of them, obviously, is Brian Hennessey, who is not only a veteran in commercial real estate and has such vast experience with acquisitions and far more than that, but he is also a teacher and meaning he was courteous enough to basically share his knowledge with the world years ago already and help us people move up in that rank in commercial real estate. Thank you, Brian, for being with us today. I really appreciate it.
Shai, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you so much. I'll tell you something. We're going to dive deep into your story, but beforehand, if you could give us a 2-minute elevator pitch about what you do today, and then we're going to start digging in.
Well, I still do brokerage, but we're also doing syndication as well. So we're trying to find the types of properties that will allow us to weather any headwinds that will be coming up here, which we know they're coming. We just don't know exactly when they're going to be hitting. But I've been doing this long enough to tell you this doesn't keep going on forever and keep going up. It's the old yin and the yang of the universe. So, but to give you the kind of short version, nutshell of how I started out. I actually was started out in residential, never really excited about it. I was always looking at commercial properties. And then I decided to jump in with both feet into commercial many years ago and never looked back. And after I had been a commercial broker for 18 years, I sold a client a couple of properties that was his avocation. And he made so much money on the second one, he told me that he wanted to do it full time and hire me as his acquisition guy. And I told him, you don't buy enough properties for me to do that, but I'll help you in any way I possibly can. And he worked on me for about a year after that, and then
which year was that, by the way?
What's that?
Which year was that?
That was in 2002.
Okay.
And so at the end of 2002, he said, he called me up on a Sunday night and said, what are you doing? I said, I'm watching TV with the kids. And he said, well, no, what are you doing in your profession? I said, I'm doing what I've always done. I'm out there hustling properties and, And he said, I want to talk to you about coming over to work. I said, I really don't buy enough property. He says, no, I've bought 500,000 feet since we last spoke. And I go, not around here, you didn't? He goes, no, I'm buying it in different parts of the country. And I want you to come to my office on Monday and see what I'm doing. And I said, okay. So I went over there and he showed me this big elaborate thing that he wanted to do. And he bought some properties in like Birmingham, Alabama, and Houston, someplace. And
what type of properties were there?
He was buying cheap office, price per pound office type of things, right? And so he finally convinced me. He said, listen, just come on over here. This is an opportunity that and he had big ambitions. He says, I want to buy 1 million square feet next year, and then a year after 2 million, 3 million. I want to become a REIT. I wanted to, So I was like, wow. And this guy was a live wire, So I said, okay. I told him, I said, let me talk to my wife. So my wife said, look, if you think he's going to do that and you want to see what it's like to, work with him like that, go ahead. And I said, okay. So I did. And we ended up acquiring almost 9 million square feet in, it was about 4 years. And it was a lot all over the country. And I was on a plane a lot. I was on a plane more than I care to think about, but it was a very interesting experience because we just had a little group of people that worked on this stuff, but we kept getting better and better at it. And then what happened is the first couple of transactions that I did, I realized that I thought it was going to be a natural slide as a commercial broker to go into an acquisition position, but it was anything but a natural slide. It's very different from being a broker. And then I decided that after I got my lunch taken away a couple of times that I needed to create a manual that had all the questions I needed to ask and the checklists and all the issues I needed to visit. So I started keeping this basically a manual for myself about due diligence. And I did that over a period. Then actually at the end of 6 years, I ended up syndicating my own properties. I syndicated 5 office buildings in Houston, 350,000 feet. So a lot of lessons, hard lessons and expensive lessons were learned during that period of time. So I kept it all. Every time I learned a new lesson, I put it in my manual. But what happened is a lot of things happened. We all know that what happened in 2009 when the world imploded in the commercial real estate world. And, but I went back to work for the investor I was working with in January 2010, because he wanted to take his company public. And that was one of the most interesting years I had ever spent in the commercial real estate industry, because there was like 40 companies trying to take their companies public that year, and only 4 of them succeeded because they were all trying to bail themselves out. But we had the best of the best helping us. We didn't end up taking it public, but the learning curve was just tremendous, because it just, Wall Street looks at real estate very different than
very different.
The average investor. So a lot of lessons were learned during that time. In 2012, after selling about $600 million worth of his properties, I decided I needed to move on, because he was just, selling stuff off, and I didn't need to be there just doing that. So I went back into brokerage, and that's when I decided I better figure this out, because I had been out of the brokerage world for so long. So I decided to take my manual and create an investor due diligence handbook, right? Just as a marketing tool, because I didn't know what else to do. I was knocking on doors, calling people, and it just wasn't getting the same responses I used to get. So once I did that, I just took it, wouldn't even pay the $150 to have a cover designed for it at the time, because I never thought I was going to sell one copy. I just figured it's just a marketing piece. I'll just put it up there. But what I found is people started buying it slowly, and I said, well, somebody must find the information useful.
That was 2012, right?
Yeah. And so what I did is I decided to, okay, well, maybe I should add some stories, make it a little more relatable. And then I had a professional cover made for it. And then I was working for Colliers at the time, and I met the CEO of Colliers, and I was talking to him at a conference, and he said, hey, would you be willing to do a webinar for us? I said, well, I've never done one before. He goes, you don't have to know anything about it. Just show up, give us the information. We'll put it together. You show up and give the webinar. I said, okay. So I did, and it was very well received. So I asked him if he would write a foreword to my book, right? And he said, yeah, I'd be happy to. So once I did that, and I put some other endorsements on it and put it up on Amazon, it took off, and it just ended up being a #1 best-selling book on Amazon and it's been that on and off for a lot of years, but I've been very blessed with it, because I never thought it would sell as well as it did. But the real payoff for me was the people that were contacting me and telling me, hey, thank you so much for sharing your information. It really helped me. And once I started hearing that, I was like, you know what? This is why I want to do this. This is because people are really getting the benefit of my mistakes, right? And it was like a whole new ball game for me. So I decided to write the other 2 books. And then I also created a course online. So it's been just quite a journey for me. I never thought if somebody told me 10 years ago that I'd be writing a bunch of books and, doing a course, and I'd just tell them they were crazy, but you don't know where life's going to lead you. You just have to be open and have faith that it's happening the way it's supposed to happen, right?
You know what? It's amazing. From hustling deals to syndication to actually going into deals to going into actual acquisitions to going into becoming a mentor of that because you went through the hardships and you needed to create your own manual and you had to create your own, I would say, multiple manuals, not only for acquisition, but for many other aspects, which we're going to talk about. This is, I think, fascinating. The one thing I would like to ask you is, because first of all, your book is fantastic. Obviously, I read it. It was quite a while ago, but I think that what I loved, I remember at the time about that book was that it was concise. It was really what we call to the point, and it was very, it was going through the steps in a very organized fashion. You could see that you are talking to the person who doesn't really know where to go, but it was required by the person who reads the book to know enough to understand that he's entering a very professional world and needs to buckle up and to really get to know all these aspects and all these terms. And it was excellent. I want to ask you the following.
Sure.
In terms of acquisitions, and you are experienced in acquisitions, and you explained very obviously vividly what you've done, but how can you elaborate the importance of acquisitions versus all the other aspects of real estate, right? You have management, you have holding companies, you have the sale aspect, you have a lot of aspects when it comes to real estate, right? The acquisitions aspect is something that you put tons of emphasis on. Why?
Well, that's a very good question. Mainly because you make your money on the buy, you realize the value on the sale, right?
Absolutely.
So what I found over the years is a lot of people get very enamored with the process, so to speak, of they just want to own it because they got this vision of this property making them a ton of money or whatever, and they tend to gloss over some of the more critical points. And what happened to me is I didn't know what I didn't know, and that was really the problem. And so when I jumped in there, it was, oh my gosh, I was like overwhelmed with the amount of information that was being thrown at me and having to sort it out and prioritize it and decide, okay, if I don't get the answer to this, then what do I need to do to cover myself on that? And what happens is you need to have a system. And if you don't have a process and a system, then you're really just hoping it all works out. I always say having and adhering to a proven system when conducting due diligence allows you to do it faster, easier, more efficiently, and you're less likely to miss something. Okay, you don't want stuff slipping through the cracks because, it's like the old saying goes, small leaks sink big ships, right? And I understand how people can get tired, especially if they're doing it as a side hustle when they start out, they're working their job, then they're trying to put this deal together and they got to go through the due diligence and they got to fill out the loan applications and then they have to get the appraisal done and then they have to get their investors lined up and, they're doing this. And by the time they get to the end, they're spent. They just want the deal to be, finalized so they can get on with their game plan of fixing it up or doing whatever they're going to do to add the value to it, right? Or own it. So that's when people end up leaving a lot of money on the table. And that's what I found. So you really, and the biggest problem I think for a lot of people is they assume a lot of things. And you never assume anything when you're purchasing property, even if, I'm not saying that people are going to necessarily do underhanded things, although it happens, right? But what happens is they may have good intentions, but they may not know. I can't tell you how many times when I've conducted tenant interviews and found out information and went back to the seller with it, and they said, I've owned this building for 14 years. I never knew that. And I said, well, you probably never asked the questions of the tenants that like I did, right? Because some of the tenants have been there longer than the landlord has owned the building. So, it's just a very, very important skill to learn to get good at. And the great thing about it is the learning curve is pretty quick, and you get better and better as you continue to do it, because each property is different, each market's different, each seller's different. So
You learn new things all the time.
you're always learning. I always tell people never stop learning in this business, or any business for that matter. But this business, there's so many things to know, so many nuances to it. The metrics are just much more. This is so much more complex than when I started out in the industry. In fact, when I first started out in the business, they told me, do not get involved with the due diligence with your client. He said, do not get involved in due diligence. You're asking for a lawsuit. Well, guess what? The exact opposite is true now.
Exactly.
If you're not involved, here in California,
sounds like a joke. Yeah.
you have a target. You got a bullseye on your back if you're a broker, right? So anyway, there's just so many really, really good reasons to learn it. You just can't ignore it.
Brian, some people that are listening, obviously professionals, are veterans, they know what they're doing. And some people are beginners, but everybody wants a good tip from someone who does it for almost 40 years. If you could give us a little bit of tips. Obviously, we're not going to go through the whole due diligence process now. We're not going to do this. But if you could give us, take out a few nuggets, from the process and highlight them and give us a little bit of insight of where we should actually have binoculars in those, in the process.
Sure. Let me just throw a handful out there that may resonate with some of the people, which I think that it will. Very rarely is a property worth the same as when you sign the contract than it is at the end of the due diligence period. Why? Because you've gone through the property thoroughly and you understand all of its weaknesses and all of the costs involved and things like that, that the seller's not handing you a list, or the broker's not handing you a list of all the problems that are going on with the property, right? They're got their fingers crossed saying, I hope nothing bad happens here when this thing gets closed. But you have to, one of the things I always tell people is constantly be adjusting your underwriting, your financial analysis when you're going through, because you're going to have a much clearer picture of what the value of the property is once you do that, because you're gathering all this information. And there's a lot of information to gather because you're going through all the leases, all the financials, the physical, mechanical stuff of the property. You're going through the area, the market, trying to gather more information there. And there's layers upon layers of all this stuff, right? So when you get to the end, you're an informed investor that's saying, okay, what do now? I thought it was worth this. What do I think it's really worth that? Now it may be worth every bit or more, right? But there's a very good chance that there were some things you didn't know when you first started out. So you need to take that into consideration and plug it into your underwriting. What I see newbies do is they have some ballpark numbers in their head because they've done a couple deals, and if we have to replace a couple of those, units up on the roof, we'll do that. And then there's this, that, and the other. And, we probably got another 3 to 5 years left on the roof. And, so all this stuff is going through their brain, and they're not really, they might be, writing it down on their scratch pad or something like that, saying, plug this in but it really needs to be factored in, whether it be in reserves or immediate. So when you get to the end, towards the end of your due diligence period, I always tell people, don't wait till the day before to tell them, I'm going to need $23,000 discount off this because of the problems. That's not how you do it, So make sure you're doing that. The other thing is make sure that you get out of the city. A lot of people don't do that. And find out does the property comply? Are there any code violations or any new compliances that are coming up in the near future that you should know about. Could be fire sprinklers, or it could be anything, right? But you could learn a lot by just, paying a visit down there and seeing what's going on. Sometimes volumes of information come up, including, certificate of occupancies. What if a big tenant in there didn't have a certificate of occupancy or something, and something bad happened, and the insurance company said, wait, this doesn't have an, C of O on it. So there's a lot of things like that. Don't assume your lender is going to accept all your third-party reports if they're required. Make sure they're on the lender's list of approved vendors. That's an expensive and stressful lesson to learn if they're not. Not spending time at the property. That's another one. And I always, people always say to me, I do. And we walked it and I went there with the contractor, and I go, no, that's not what I'm talking about. You got to go there on the weekends. You got to go in there in the evenings. You got to go there at different times of the day. Why? Because the property is like a living organism. There's stuff going on in the area,
different times,
the building, right? You got to spend time there. A lot of people don't check out their competition. When I say that, I'm not just saying depends on the property too, but don't just get in a car and drive by. Go, if it's office, then go as an office tenant and ask the leasing broker to take you through the competitive set. If it's a apartment building, go look for an apartment as a tenant. You want to know your competition. You want to see what you're up against, right? And the other thing that always throws me for a loop is when people don't interview the tenants. When I come across people that come to me and say, I need some help. I had this tenant, I bought the building and they went bankrupt, they went out. I said, what happened when you interviewed the tenant? Well, the landlord wouldn't let me, the seller wouldn't let me interview the tenant. Well, and you went ahead anyway? Why? That should have been a big red flag for you if they're saying,
right.
You're better off sometimes walking away than throwing the dice on that stuff. It's just, there's a bunch of stuff. I do. Just the list gets long,
Yeah, exactly. You gave us a lot right now. I want to ask you the following. And there are many asset classes in real estate. And it goes from some basic knowledge in commercial real estate with multifamily, the smaller types of multifamily, larger types. And then it goes into office, which is a bit more complex. And then it goes into retail, which is more complex. And then it goes into hotels, and you can go on and on, industrials, etc. In your book, and also I think, I can't remember if you touched all the asset classes in your book, but I remember you did touch a bunch. That I do remember. Could you give us a little bit of a tip of the major differences in the due diligence process that come between the asset classes?
Yeah, I would say probably you want to get proficient at metrics when it comes to the asset classes, because let's take multifamily. Multifamily is red hot right now. Do I think it's going to be red hot forever? No, I don't think so. I think at some point it's going to turn around. But for right now, it is, because we're depending upon the area. That's the other thing that people have to realize, that real estate has become very localized, right? It can be hotter in one area and dead in another, right? Why? Because of a bunch of factors. Could be crime rate, employment, migration out of the area. Major employer moved, and that was a big, attraction. I tell people, if you're looking at multifamily, you really need to look at, is there a big migration of millennials moving into the area? Because in the Sun Belt is one, I'm talking US, Sun Belt is the biggest growth area and has been for a number of years. And that's for a bunch of reasons, right? But, you want to look at crime rate. Is there job growth? What's the trend of that? What is the population growth trend? Millennial growth I talked about. What about rental rates? Are they going up in the area, right? What's been the historical occupancy? So you want to look at these things, because those metrics are going to give you a big picture, right, to look at. And
Absolutely.
so you want to get proficient at that, because if you don't, you're really taking a big chance. I call it the moth to a flame syndrome, where people see a price per square foot, right, or a cap rate, and when I ask them, do you know the reason that cap rate is high, or do you know the reason
Right.
that price per square foot is so low? How long has the building been at,
There's no roof.
60%? Yeah, right, right. There's usually a pretty good reason for that, especially if you're from out of town and you don't know.
Absolutely. Um, you know what? So many asset classes, so many things that we need to know when we're going to acquisitions. There's another book of yours that touches, the aspect of how to add value to a property. And I loved that one because it gave such a great aspect, such a great perspective in terms of where do you see the downsides, and to have, especially people, everybody's spitting this value add. Oh, I'm going into value add deals. And not a lot of people know how to actually add the value. So if you could give us a little bit of, that aspect, some tips about the value add aspect.
I can throw a few tips, I think, that will kind of highlight and underscore a lot of what's in that book. But I go through specific examples in there, because reason I wanted to write that book is because I kept seeing over the years people making the same mistakes. Even people that have owned properties for many years were still making the same mistakes over and over again. And some of them are basic, and some of them are just, human nature, I think, has to do with it. But I have a saying in there that says, don't step over the dollar to pick up the nickel, right? And wherever you're from, you could put it in that currency. But what I mean by that is people are so busy trying to save a commission or a few bucks to do it cheaper or on the cheap, that what they end up doing is they end up cheating themselves, right? And for somebody that owns a property that has vacancy in it, and they have some people have this thing about hiring brokers to do leasing because they had a bad experience or whatever the case may be, right? But the reality is, you want to incentivize the brokers as much as possible, because that's how they make a living. If you're the person that says, hey, tell you what, you bring me a tenant, what's the standard commission out there right now on a lease, on a 5-year lease? Well, it's 4%. How about I give you 5%? How about I give you 6% if you get me one by, in the next 60 days? What do you think they're going to be doing when they wake up in the morning? They're going to be thinking about, how can I get him or her a tenant in that building? I'll make 50% more than I would typically make, right? And what you want to do is make them your ally, not your adversary, okay? Because they're the people that are out there talking to the tenants, and you want to pay them right away, and you want to give them every reason to want to bring March tenants through. You want to be at the top of their list of when they have a tenant to bring them through your property. Now, I've had people say, yeah, I've had sick of brokers who are stealing tenants from my building. And I said, let me tell you something. I said, I'm not just saying this because I've been a broker for many years, but when I had my own buildings,
Right,
I would tell my brokers who I hired to lease, listen, what's going on with this tenant? They're coming up soon. Well, we heard that they're out there looking at space. A 10,000 foot tenant. So I said, let me tell you something. I need to talk to their broker, their tenant rep broker, right away. And if I can't talk to them, I want you to tell them that I'm going to pay them a full commission and $1 a square foot bonus if we can keep them in the building. Right. And guess what?
it's a beautiful tip.
She was all over it. And that was a very tough time. Let me tell you, if I would have lost 10,000 square feet, that would have been a big hit. So that's what I mean about being proactive, out there, out in front. Make sure your property looks good. If just somebody left the suite and left their furnishings and trash around or whatever, get it cleaned up. If it's within a certain amount of time, that in your neighborhood, wherever your locale, that you have to sometimes if they moved out and it was a midnight move, you got to put their furniture away for 60 days or whatever before you sell it. But get it out of there, clean it up. If the carpet is really, really bad, tear it out. Do a whitewash of the wall so it looks clean and new and, you know, at least fresh, right? Make it look as well as you can. If it's small enough, under 3,000 feet or under, spec build it out, right? Put a carpet in, a neutral color and white, you know, or wash the walls and make it look good, make it look clean.
Right. And you have so many aspects of the property that you can actually change and make better. These are great tips. Brian, you know, I'm looking at you and sorry to point out a lot of white hair. And that means that you've been through a lot of turbulence in the markets.
I earned every one of these white hairs.
Exactly. You earned every one of these. I'm sure you did. Where do you, I know you don't have a crystal ball right now, but where do you think the market is going nowadays? Everybody's talking about the market, different asset classes in the market. We know what happened in the pandemic. Where are we going?
Well, here's the way I look at this. This is unprecedented waters that we're in right now. In the US of A, we've had such a huge amount of debt incurred by the government, purposely, I believe, devaluing the dollar. And it's flooded the market. I think Wells Fargo Bank had a report that said there's over $4.5 trillion in money market funds right now, right? Now, what does that mean? It means that people are looking for a home for it, right? Because every day that it sits in the money market fund, they're losing due to inflation. Those of us that have been around during inflation, and I was in it when I first started in the business. I was a young buck. And then that was in the mid 70s. And then later in the early 80s, I remember interest rates being 18%.
Yeah, crazy.
And I was in residential at the time, and I was take the client to the bank, and the banker would tell him, you don't want to borrow money right now. This is a bad time to borrow money. And I'm thinking to myself, why am I taking this client to the bank to have them tell me that, right? So we got real creative with these all-inclusive deed of trust where they'd wrap it around the main deed of trust, and then you'd pay that to the seller, and then the seller would pay it so that wouldn't trigger an acceleration provision to pay off the loan, you know. So we had to get creative, but I tell that story because those people that don't believe that could happen again, I promise you, we will see it. I promise you, maybe even greater than we saw back in the early 80s. And so, but getting back to the original question, I think real estate's one of the few places where you could plug your money into as an inflation hedge. Now, does that mean that the properties just keep going up and up in value? No, because when interest rates start coming up, guess what's happened to cap rates? They'll start creeping up too, right? But this is a unique kind of scenario because people aren't wanting to go into the stock market. They don't want to put their money in the bank because they're going to lose money. The bond market is not where they want to put it. Crypto is very interesting to me, but some of it's very speculative.
It's volatile, of course.
Yeah. And I think so all of these things are pointing towards real estate as a good shelter and hedge against inflation while we're going through these times. And so, but to me, when people ask me, do you think this is a good time to invest in commercial real estate? I said, absolutely, it is. But I will tell you this, that due diligence is even more important now than it ever was. Because if you don't know what you're doing, you could get hurt, right? And you really, really want to make sure that where you're investing and what you're investing is really has the odds stacked in its favor to be able to weather any storms that come up, because we will go through some storms. There's no doubt in my mind, but I do think that at the end of the day, that if you're doing it properly and learning all the fundamentals you need to learn, and just being very prudent, let's use that word, about your investing, I think you'll do fine. In fact, probably better than fine.
You know something, if you could give us a little bit of an overview, specifically because you've dealt with that asset class, office. I think it's the one asset class that is still in the air, nobody understands. Because retail, okay, we got it out of the way in terms of we know what's happening with retail. We understand the e-commerce revolution. We know what happened during the pandemic. Great. We understand the hotel went to zero and now is trying to get back, and those big pockets of family offices are buying hotels. Great. We understand that multifamily is the most resilient asset class. Everybody needs a roof over their head. We got that point. We understand those, and we understand the markets are different in different places. But office, there's still a question. I talk about it a lot. What is your perspective on that?
I spent most of my career in office. Office is morphing into some other things. I think the institutional players and what have you, that have the capital to put into it to create these environments for companies that are conscientious about their employees, and because this COVID thing's going to be overhanging for a while, will be an advantage to the ones who don't do it. If you have like walk-up garden type office buildings, you may be okay depending upon the area they're in, because people won't have to interact with other people as much. But I would say be cautious about where you're investing in office, because make sure it's got the growth that you're looking for and in the marketplace, because it is still going through some changes. It's not an easy asset class to own, especially when you start getting in the bigger ones, because it's subject to a lot of issues, right? The economy, pandemic, which none of us saw coming, right? And so you have to be, if I were looking at like value add type, I would be thinking about what else can you use this office building for? Can it be repurposed for multifamily or mixed use, or right? So you have to be a little bit more cautious when you're approaching that genre. I'm not saying you can't make money on it.
Right.
I'm just saying, yeah.
You got to know what you're doing, got to understand the market, and you got to be careful. And you have to know the due diligence process, obviously. Brian, thank you so much. And obviously, I know you have to run. I don't want to keep you. But this interview, as we said, is not over. There's another part of the interview that I would like to perform. And we'll schedule right after this this podcast. We'll schedule another time to do that, which is very interesting to you guys, listeners, to understand how to actually shift careers in an older age, which is I find fascinating, and I'm sure many of you will. At this point, Brian, before we said our goodbyes, if you could tell people where to find you in terms of the brokership, in terms of the books, and in terms of the courses, et cetera, please tell them. And you guys look at the links above, below. You could obviously click on those. Brian.
Yeah, I would say if you're going to go get the books, the Due Diligence Handbook for Commercial Real Estate, the Due Diligence Handbook, or How to Add Value Handbook for Commercial Real Estate that Shai was talking about, and then there's also another one on there, the Residential Agents Handbook for Commercial Real Estate. Those are three that can help people if they're looking to get into commercial real estate. They're also on audiobook with Audible and iTunes. And then I have a course at impactcoachingsystems.com that is, I go into the deep dive, and there's a lot of resources on there. And if you go and you put in DDHB20, you get 20% off. So
you guys heard it.
Yeah. So at any rate, would love to join you on another show. And thanks so much for having me. It's been a great pleasure for me to share this information. I love sharing it with others, and look forward to the next time when I get to be on.
For sure. Thank you, Brian, for being with us. You guys, I'll see you in the next show.